Hello, this is a Brave Knight Mercenary spotlight on Calorone. Calorone is a 5-star rarity defender. It's unknown as to where she came from, but presumably she was once part of a thriving country that came under attack. She was fatally wounded in the attack and came to contact with a fallen angel named Solitone. Desperate to stay alive and swearing vengeance, she made a contract with Solitone to gain newfound powers at the cost of her humanity. She now aims to defy fate and kill gods. Very edgy. I'll briefly go over Calorone's skills, gameplay style, and provide some of my opinions on her. I won't be going over the details of her skills, but just the general parts of it. I'll link to Brave Knight's Encyclopedia in the video description where you can easily read on her stats and skill values. Calorone's first skill is Damage Distortion. At the beginning of battle, Calorone gains the ability to distort all non-direct damage for a set amount of turns. The skill cannot be removed or nullified. Distortion damage is a mechanic that you may be familiar with if you watched my Eleanor and Bane video, but Calorone's introduction was the very first time we saw the skill. I'll explain how distortion damage works. Let's say Calorone takes a hit, and after calculating her defense, agility, the opponent's crit rate, and etc., the final damage value ends up being 1000 damage. That 1000 damage is now a mark that is on Calorone. For 10 turns, Calorone would take a percentage of that 1000 damage as fixed damage. If Calorone is plus 1 to plus 11, she'll pay off 10% of the damage for 10 turns. 10% of 1000 is 100, so Calorone takes 100 damage worth of fixed damage every turn. However, if Calorone is at plus 12 and above, she only takes 6% of the bank damage every turn, which is 60 damage per turn. The duration of the mark still lasts for 10 turns. This means Calorone only has to pay off a total of 60% of the actual damage taken to be free of the mark. Hopefully that makes sense, but the TLDR is that Calorone ends up taking a lot less damage than what it seems. Calorone's second skill is Regeneration Barrier. At the beginning of battle, Calorone gains a temporary unremovable barrier that provides incoming damage reduction and heals part of her max HP every turn. Calorone's third skill is Cleverness. At the beginning of battle, Calorone gains a buff that will grant her crit rate and crit damage stat enhancement whenever she is attacked. The skill does not stack. Calorone's awakening skill is Furious Strike. Calorone deals additional damage after her normal attack based on the enemy's current health. At plus 11 and above, she heals for 150% of the damage that this additional damage deals. Calorone's gameplay is to act as a roadblock tank. Her ability to transfer damage to distortion damage and slowly pay it off over time synergizes very well with her Regeneration's Barrier ability to heal her over time. Calorone has to take a lot of damage to begin losing more life than she is healing, which is possible if she is focused down. In a sense, Calorone works a lot like a non-legend version of Lucius. She's a tank without taunt who is meant to hold her place in lane. Calorone can be very sticky, even without the need of buffs. To put it into perspective, Calorone at plus 14 and above has 65% damage reduction, base 10% defense, and fairly high base HP of around 9000. But more importantly, she is regenerating 9% of her max health per turn, and she only takes 6% of her distorted damage per turn. Calorone has to take around 1.5 times her max HP of damage just to break even with her heal. Anything more and she will begin to bleed out, and this is not considering Calorone's own attack which can heal her, nor the influence of buffs. Speaking of Calorone's own attack, Furious Strike combined with the buff provided by Cleverness can cause her to deal fairly decent damage to HP tanks, but because the buff doesn't stack with itself, Calorone needs help from other buffs to do meaningful damage as Furious Strike is influenced by the opponent's defense and damage reduction. The nice part is that Calorone heals off of the additional damage from Furious Strike, which can help with survivability. I'll go over what Calorone counters. Calorone's ability of tanking units depends on if they can apply enough damage to where Calorone begins taking more damage from her distortion damage than what she can heal. The threshold for this is pretty high. Calorone is distinctively good at holding off Seto. Seto's fixed damage on his attack and his counter is strong, but not strong enough to cause issues for Calorone. Similarly, Calorone is actually very good at holding off fixed damage or defense ignoring units because most of them only do enough damage to kill off 100% defense units, but not enough to be of any issue to Calorone. Overall, Calorone can generally hold off most units well, but wants to be wary of ones with DOT as DOT damage can begin to accumulate a lot. I'll go over some Calorone counters now. Calorone cannot distort direct damage, so Levia and Alec are fairly simple counters to Calorone. Calorone's lack of DOT immunity also makes her highly susceptible to bleed DOTs. Nia, Christina, and Xenon can cause issues for Calorone in this regard. Catherine also deals overwhelming damage with her burn, far beyond what Calorone can typically handle. Some units may be able to overwhelm Calorone by dealing enough damage to the point where she loses far more life than she can out heal. A buffed Gunther, Nartes, Valze, or Yuri could be good for this. If you're unable to hurt Calorone in a meaningful way where she takes more damage as she heals, you can apply methods of damage amplification onto her to soften her up. Celia, Orvina, and Barbara have methods of doing this. Otherwise, Calorone is fairly easy to overwhelm just by hitting her a lot, although that's partially what Calorone wants you to do. From a strategic perspective, it's best to ignore Calorone if possible and focus on other units if you encounter Calorone in a situation where you can place her units beforehand. So some synergies with Calorone. Calorone's lack of immunities makes her susceptible to many things, so providing her with immunities is valuable. Michaela can provide DOT immunity, for example. Calorone heavily benefits from any buffs that can increase her survivability. Raphithia, Julie, Albion, Helga, and Floria are some good examples. Sola gives everything that Calorone wants, while also providing Calorone offensive stats with her offensive aura. Calorone can begin to deal considerable damage as a result. The 40% defense boost, the attack interference immunity, and the heal is very good. Okay, so for my opinion. First off, inevitably Calorone is going to be compared to Bane and Lucius. Particularly Calorone would definitely be compared to Bane because both characters utilize similar mechanics. The main difference between the two is that Bane is an initiator and a taunt tank. Bane has to ramp up and that involves him attacking. While Bane is very strong and can take out many units with the stigma and reach insane levels of taking us afterwards, Bane can still be killed if he's not hit before he attacks. This can easily happen in defense forms where the opponent has the initiative. Calorone is a bit different in that all of her functionality is activated right at the battle start. Even if she is hit right at the beginning by a powerful attack, she may be able to live. Calorone plays similarly to Lucius due to both characters being a roadblock tank. Lucius depends on his death guard to tank, while Calorone relies on her distortion damage. Unlike Lucius, Calorone can actually hold off multi-hits fairly well outside of Christina, but Lucius is still far the more reliable tank, as Calorone can still be one-shot if she takes too much damage for one hit, which is very possible with some attacks. So the question begs, should you invest in Calorone? And my answer is a definitive no, unless you like how she looks of course. Not gonna lie, Calorone is a very powerful aesthetic. The main issue I have with Calorone is that she just simply doesn't do anything while generally being inferior to other alternatives. We're in a meta where we have Lucius being able to resurrect twice on his own, while Bane and Kaelin are out there tanking other units better than Calorone arguably can, while also killing many other units as well. Calorone does her job well, but she only does one job essentially. Calorone could do certain things better than the other tanks, but I generally have to resort to nitpicks to find reasons to justify Calorone while the other tanks feel a lot more convincing to use. Calorone's presence isn't scary, and she provides very little pressure. Calorone only really finds use in World Arena and Guild War. Calorone's use in World Arena is valuable in situations where you don't want to use a legendary slot to field a Lucius, but still need a character to hold a position in a lane. Calorone could be put in skip to survive Orvina and Seto, for example. Calorone's use in Guild War is primarily as a second Lucius. In situations where I need Lucius to tank a lane and need another tank to hold off another lane, Calorone usually comes to mind. These are still fairly niche cases however, and while Calorone isn't awful, I definitely cannot recommend her over other tanks such as Bane or Kaelin. When it comes to investing in Calorone, realize that Calorone is actually pretty complete at +0 even. +2 is fairly efficient for her to be in, as she gains a lot of healing and a regeneration barrier. +3 to +9 is kind of a bust, because I don't find Calorone's offensive buffs to be very valuable. Taking advantage of Calorone's offensive stats requires considerable support buffs, which are often better focused on other units that are more suitable to deal damage. From +11 and onwards though, Calorone begins gaining more defensive traits such as a longer regeneration barrier, more damage reduction, and extended duration of being able to distort damage, all of which are nice. I recommend to keep her at +0 or +2, and prepare for the long haul if you intend to fully max her out, which isn't necessary. +14 is already more than enough. Overall, Calorone is a cool character, but I feel that she was very experimental and her gameplay identity is heavily overshadowed by better tanks. She introduced a cool mechanic that ended up being better utilized by the likes of Bane and Eleanor. Calorone could still hold her own, and she has her specialties, but her general low impact holds her back. That concludes my Calorone Mercenary Spotlight. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, like, subscribe, etc. Thank you.